platform to promote Latinos in sports, teaming up with Nielsen to conduct a first-of-its-kind study of the impact of Latino fandom, viewership, and other trends across all major American sports. Joining us right now is Xavier Gutierrez, ImpactX. Is it ImpactX? ImpactX. We were talking about just the spellings of things, because you can say impacts, like impacts, like with the X at the end. The Sports Group chairman and CEO, also Latinos in Sports co-founder and former Arizona Coyotes CEO. Good morning to you.
Good morning, guys.
So talk to us about what this endeavor is all about.
So Latinos in Sports is a new enterprise. When I was appointed the CEO of the Arizona Coyotes, I was the first Latino CEO in the history of the NHL, one of the only of 153 teams in the top 5 major sports leagues. And I said, that can't be. That can't be when you talk about the importance of sports, when you talk about the importance to commerce, to culture, to community. These are engines of economic activity. They're influencers of culture. And Latinos, I say this all the time, sports is important. Latinos are important to sports. You need those voices at the seat of decision making.
And so what does that mean?
So for me, I think in terms of practice is we want to identify great talent and introduce them to folks in the sports industry to say they should be part of your decision-making process. They should have that voice. And so that's what this organization is all about. It's about having convenings. It's about talking about content and data and talking about the impact of Latinos to the sports industry.
What is the percentage of Latinos in the management of professional sports today?
It's very low, and I don't think it's been captured. As I told you, I was the only CEO. Obviously, we sold the team and moved on. The Moss family also run Inter Miami. They're the owners. And that's all you have. And so I don't think that that's enough in terms of representation. But more importantly, it's about the discussion and the conversation. That's why we were so excited about this report from Nielsen, to capture Latino fandom, to show how passionate they are.
What's the percentage of players in terms of different professional sports? I'm sure it's different for different sports, maybe baseball more than other professional sports in the U.S. Obviously, soccer or football in a huge way. But how often do those players end up in management of these teams later?
I think that's a good question. I think very few of them do. Very few of them end up as owners, for sure. But I don't exactly know the percentage by the leagues.
Why do you think that is? Because there is an effort, I think, taking place among, not by race or demographic per se, but there is clearly a move, at least by some players in a whole bunch of leagues, to move either into ownership positions or into management positions.
Well, I think that's part of this conversation you have had in the past, which is the commercialization, the professionalization of sports is now, I think, opening up those doors. You're talking about these things that used to be really family-run businesses, and now they are big business. These are not just teams. These are business enterprises. And I think part of that effort is to open those doors to former players, to diverse talent from other industries. As you know, I came from private equity, and I think that's part of that.
So here's my private equity, sort of to bring the conversation we're having off air onto the air. As a former private equity man and a man in sports, do you think that this whole move afoot in many leagues now, where private equity are going to own stakes in some of these businesses, is going to change the game itself?
Well, I think you and I don't see eye to eye on that. I think where it's going to change it is these, not just as teams, but as business enterprises. When you think about the real estate opportunities, the intellectual property, this is the most valuable intellectual property in the world. These brands, these logos. You have the NFL in Brazil tonight. The market expansion opportunity. And that's something that I've been talking about with my new venture with all the private equity funds that want to be in sports but want to move beyond the core asset of the team and look at all these other opportunities. I don't think it'll change it on the field, on the ice, on the pitch. I think as a business enterprise.
Well, the reason I raise the prospect of it changing things is, you've had owners, in many cases, families that own these teams oftentimes for many decades, generationally. And so when you get into a situation where every, call it 10 or 12 years, you're going to have to create some kind of exit environment or moment for some minority stake player in this, it just means that there's going to be a lot more turnover, I imagine, of the teams in their entirety at some level, because there's going to be some people who say the only way to do this is to get the full value for everybody, is to get out. So then there's that consistency question, especially when you look at teams that are owned sometimes by, as I said, a family that owns it for a generation. That seems like it's going to be a different thing. And then there's other team owners who will do things that might arguably be financially irrational in the short term for several years because they think they can win a championship. And they say, you know what, I'm going to spend the money now because I think I can get a championship. And then it's unclear, by the way, how much the championship, even if you get it, is economically worth.
Sure.
And whether you're going to have some private equity minority player, even if they're a minority, but they're in the room and they have some voice at the table saying, no. We got to keep the cash flow going because otherwise this is a completely crazy thing to be doing.
Listen, we're in the nascent stage of it all. We're in the first inning, as they would say, in the first quarter. It'll be interesting how it evolves. What I'm excited about is the fact that you have this professionalization of sports that's happening. Right. Obviously the governance is being very limited in terms of the minority stakes that are being allowed in the U.S. Obviously internationally, it's a different game. But what I'm excited about bringing it back to Latinos in sports is that I think it also opens up the aperture to talk about not just your fan, but your fan in waiting. When you think about the opportunity to capture new audiences, existing audiences in a new way, and that's what we were very excited about this report, to show Latinos are fans right now. They are avid. One of the facts that Nielsen unearthed that I'm really excited about is that Latinos are 11% more likely to buy from a sponsor of a sport or a team that they follow. So you can monetize this, and they're young. The census just came out. The most dominant age for Latinos in the U.S. is 14. The general population, 59. This is a cohort that is entering these prime fandom years, these prime, working years. And so I think it's a great opportunity for sports.